Jen says they did it again. Another healthcare ad that's overrated. Tom says you're losing your touch. The press is underused and not outdated. Killer public relations, marketing, and social media in healthcare requires making the right moves at the right time. Welcome to the Overrated and Underused show. Here's your hosts, experienced marketers Jennings and Tom Testa, with special guest Adrian Stoner. Overrated and underused. The Overrated and Underused show.
All right, welcome to another episode of Overrated and Underused. We're your hosts, Tom and Jen. And Jen, I'm pretty excited about today's show. You know, throughout the year, we've had the great opportunity here on ONU to sit down with a handful of brilliant minds shaping and influencing the healthcare marketing profession. Well, today we have a very special Outside Insights segment as we're going to be joined by Bevey Miner.
Outside Insights.
Yes, these always end up being my favorite episodes because it's just a great opportunity to sit down and talk to other people in the industry, hear different perspectives. So very excited to talk to Bevey. Bevey Miner is the Global Health IT Strategy Chief Marketing Officer for Consensus Cloud Solutions. With over 20 years experience in healthcare technology and digital health, she leads strategy, product management, business development, marketing, and commercialization for the company. Bevey drives innovation in care coordination, patient engagement, population health, and interoperability, as well as advocating for policy change with federal and state government. Welcome to the show, Bevey.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So Bevey, before we get into Consensus Cloud Solutions, anything you'd like to add about your background as a marketer? It goes way beyond just those couple lines Jennifer shared. You've been doing this for a very long time. Can you talk to us a little bit more about your background and where you came from?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a hard act to follow when you say brilliant guest. So I'll try to fill the shoes of a brilliant guest on your show. But I have been doing marketing and, you know, there's a lot to marketing instead of the hard metric of in the KPI of, you know, leads. And that's what excites me, I think, is that, you know, a lot of marketing is just building trust. It's trust with the people that are going to buy your products, and trust, it takes a while. I mean, we don't trust people immediately. We don't trust strangers immediately. So especially in healthcare. And so that's what's been kind of exciting about the evolution of me being in the industry so long, and healthcare specifically in marketing, is that you have to learn that the people that are going to be buying your products, the prospects that you have, it really is not a consumer play in any way. It's probably the opposite of that kind of a spectrum. And in certain instances, it takes a while. It really depends on the product and how complicated it is. But that's something I've learned over time. And then it's a highly, highly regulated industry. And in highly regulated industries, if you can solve a problem that is putting a burden on the healthcare industry or the stakeholders that we serve because of some sort of regulatory framework, you're the partner that they're going to want to do business with.
That's interesting, Bevey. So, you know, before we get into some of the more overrated and underused aspects, talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned trust being a big factor, building that trust. How does Consensus Cloud Solutions build that trust through, you know, your marketing efforts?
Well, what's interesting about Consensus Cloud Solutions is we've been around for about 26 years now. We spun off back in October from our parent company, but we were known as J2 Global. And our product, our flagship product, is eFax. It is the F word in healthcare these days, but it is a problem. And we've had to rebrand. Consensus started out in the company as just a name for a product that we were launching. And it was a new product outside of our flagship fax product. So that product was called Consensus Unite. And that was the first brand that even had any kind of a consensus mention to it. Then we ended up adding some additional products, and we created a consensus suite for healthcare, focused on healthcare. When we spun off from our parent company in October of last year, we decided to keep the Consensus name as our company name. And that's how we became Consensus Cloud Solutions. Building a brand and building that trust, as I mentioned before, that can take anywhere from, you can buy some of it by investing a heck of a lot of money in awareness and brand building programs. You may be able to shorten that to 12 months if you can get your solutions up and running and have the kind of KPIs be very visible. Or in general, that's going to take a couple of years in healthcare for your name to start to really resonate and for people to understand what is the brand promise of that company. I know that they used to be a faxing company and they were part of J2 or they were J2. So we've had a complicated ride in terms of the launch of Consensus Cloud Solutions. And it's at the foundational level of building our brand trust, and what does the promise of doing business with Consensus Cloud Solutions mean to healthcare stakeholders. So if we had did an IPO as our own public company, we would have built a brand on our foundational company, spun off, had a ticker symbol, which we would have had to repeat over and over again. But the big challenge we had was a spin-off from a parent company that almost looked like we were a brand new organization in the industry.
Why do you feel building that brand identity in healthcare? Jennifer and I probably have a good understanding why, but we'd love to hear from you. Why do you think it's not something that can happen overnight, but that might take 2-3 years to solidify that brand identity?
Well, I think there's a lot of noise in the healthcare industry. There's a lot of vendors. I mean, Epic aside, we'll just put them on the shelf because I used to work at Allscripts when we were neck and neck in 2006 and 2012
Right.
in that period with Epic. But putting Epic aside, putting Cerner aside, we have a lot of different players that are solving problems in healthcare. We've got not traditional healthcare IT companies. We've got companies like, Verizon that are in this space. We have companies like IBM that are in this space. And there's so many really respected companies that are specifically solving different issues, different problems for a specific stakeholder. And many of them have been around for a long, long time. And we've got a series of competitors that are also eating away at that particular market share. But it's hard to look at big guys and say, well, I'm just going to go with a trusted, tried and true, and I'm going to buy as everybody else buys. It takes a lot of research, and their competitiveness is getting bigger and bigger and bigger because so many companies want to enter the healthcare space. Traditionally, health IT stock trades at a higher multiple. It's an industry that is, I'm going to say, economically resilient to all of the economic times that we see. It's not completely buffered from that, as we know, the issues that happened with COVID, and many of the systems that were on very thin margins have either folded, been acquired, or is still struggling today. But there's just so many choices in healthcare and so many places that you can go to solve a problem. That's hard for a vendor to be able to rise above that kind of noise. If you just go to the flagship trade show that we all know, maybe not all know and love, but we all know, which is HIMSS, the floor is just full of so much noise. And I really pity some of the 10 by 10 booths. They're hoping they can get, some level of exposure at an event like that. And that's where I also think organizations like CLAS come into play. For those listeners that might not be aware of what CLAS does, it's the acronym of KLAS. CLAS awards every year what they call best in class. And I mean, I have to say they have maybe close to 100 different categories of best in class at different times. And it's somewhat of the Yelp rating that says, look, I don't even know where to go or what I should look at. And if I at least have a guide like best in class for all different kinds of things, whether it happens to be an EHR, or if it's interface engines, or if it's a digital cloud faxing solution like ours, you at least have some sort of a framework. The other thing that prospects and players in the healthcare industry rely on quite a bit because of that noise is their peers. So peer-to-peer is a really, really big piece of what any marketer in this industry needs to think about, is that if your peers, this hospital down the street likes what you do, they're going to be a little more trusting. So that's why things like testimonials, use cases, case studies are just so critical to be able to show what value you've had, or reference sites, which is very important as well, because they will listen to their peers. And then the last piece that's kind of interesting is a FOMO aspect in healthcare of missing out, right? Especially for large systems. Large systems don't want to be the last to deploy natural language processing or artificial intelligence to solve some problems that we've been having for year after year after year with human intervention. That happens to be one of our types of solutions. They don't want to be the last one that says, wow, look at the hospital down the street, figured out how to really make a difference by employing some of these new novel technologies. So it's confusing. And I feel for the buyers sometimes because of all the noise and education that they have to have for fear of investing in something that's just not going to show the results.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to hear someone else talk about, all the noise that there is in the healthcare space, because anytime you look at exhibitor list or, for these conferences, you see startup pavilions and so many companies that you will see that year, but then may not even make it to the next year. So there's so many companies that want to be a part of healthcare for all the reasons that you kind of just talked about, Bevey, and, how resilient it has been, towards the market and everything. But it's just not all the companies make it. And so there are so many companies out there offering different solutions. And I think as a buyer, sometimes it is hard to know who to trust, who's going to be around for the long haul, who has built that successful brand, who looks like a company that's, very knowledgeable about, the market and, all the products and everything. So trust, authenticity, I think all that kind of goes hand in hand, especially when you're talking about, the brand that you want to put in a healthcare market.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Bevy, too. I heard a couple components there, and I kind of want to jump right into our overrated and underused aspect of the show. I heard you mention a couple tactics, I guess, right? And I want to ask him back up. Third-party endorsements like class, but also getting references and stuff from other customers and things like that. Is that overrated or underused in your estimate?
I think it's underused, and it really sort of depends upon what products you're offering into the marketplace. If you're doing something that's new, sort of novel, and it's more like a toolbox, it's not a product that has sort of rigid box around it that says this product solves this one problem. This is how you want to manage it. It can fit into, other workflows that you have, but it solves this problem. If it's more like a toolbox, and toolbox would be similar to products that we have. Consensus Clarity is an NLP AI solution, but it's about what problem you want to solve, because it has endless uses. Part of the confusion of that type of a solution in healthcare is that many systems are sitting back thinking, what do I do with this? I don't even know where to begin to try and solve a problem using that new technology. And that's why I think you have to get down to those use cases. Many startups fail in that specific area because they think their baby is so beautiful. This is my baby. Look at what we do. And they're missing the point on saying, who are we really trying to sell this to solve what problem? They're pretty much thinking that, well, the industry should figure that out because we're really cool at what we do. And if there is no reimbursement for what you do, meaning there's no code a physician can charge someplace for what your solution is, if it skirts on the edge of potentially needing FDA, because you're saying, oh, we help you diagnose faster, we help you, do treatments better, you better watch that. But you might feel compelled to say, oh, that's what we do. And then there's a risk reward that says you got to go vanilla on that. And if you go vanilla on it, you don't have decisive headlines. So one of the things that I think is completely underrated here
Underused
is really matching a problem that you're solving with a specific use case against a specific target. And you need to know the pain points that target has. Are they regulatory? Are they workflow? Are they communications oriented? Is it provider to patient? Is it provider to provider? And then just really understand, even if you don't have customers that have specifically used your product for that specific use case, you have to talk about the art of the possible. And that's where I think, and if you can play it out where the use case is actually in use somewhere, and you can show specifically this great prior authorization solution shaved 8 days, 10 days off of approval processes, or identified urgent authorizations, even the better. But especially many startups are just starving to get the customers and the logos. They failed to push back with their first set of customers to say, well, we want to do a benchmark of, what our improvements were. They don't want to be under the magnifying glass that much, but ultimately that's going to be important.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Overrated and Underused on Healthcare Now Radio. Today's episode is a special Outside Insights interview with Bevey Miner of Consensus Cloud Solutions. Now, Bevey, in our first half of the show, we talked a lot about some of the overrated and underused aspects that you find are being used in healthcare marketing. One thing I want to get back to for a quick second is that whole noise, the issue of noise, right? But from a media perspective. And one thing I do know, having known you for about 2 years now, is that you used to also be on the other side of things too. You were a reporter, correct?
Yes, I was.
Right. And so
Definitely was a reporter.
and I love that's why I always love and value your take and your insights as to what is news. One thing I'd love to hear from you too, which I don't think is overrated, is how to get your news rising to the top. Like what really sets it aside in all this noise. Can you weigh in on that for us?
Yeah, thanks for giving me the focus of memory lane down the road when I worked as a general assignment reporter for the Arizona Republic way back when, and I was 10 years old because we still use typewriters. I mean, when you really look at journalism reporting, news is very different than a sponsored article somewhere, so to speak, or a blog, which is written more in an editorial as first person. And what I think a lot of folks think is, again, it's in the startup mentality, it's my baby is beautiful, and how beautiful my baby is going to be the headline. Editors aren't going to care about your headline. But if your headline is going to support something that has to do with the 21st Century Cures Act, or something that happened with a new proposed legislation on Medicare Advantage prior authorizations that just was approved by Congress on its way to the Senate, then you've got something that's hanging its hat on news value.
Right.
We're entering, and we have been on the cusp of this, the Great Resignation in healthcare. Unprecedented times in this industry that we have never seen before. We don't have the caregivers to take care of sick people. We have burnt out our healthcare system in such a way that those that got into this industry because they truly wanted to help people, the nurses, the triage folks, physicians, just said, I don't bring my best self and I'm dealing with patients' lives. So I got to get out because I have to now put on my oxygen mask. Because I'm starting to fall, I'm starting to dwindle, I'm going into behavioral health issues, I'm getting sick. And what are we going to do about it? It's so daunting and it's such a huge, big problem, partly too, because healthcare has been one of the last frontiers to enter technology, so to speak. Very people promoted, very paper. There's still so much faxing paper that goes on in healthcare. It's pretty scary. And we relied on those people to treat and to care for and to solve the problems in healthcare. So when you think about what's my headline going to be,
right?
What's my spin? What's my story? Think about the readers of a specific publication. Think about Fierce Health and Becker's and publications that are very well respected that cover healthcare. And what are they likely going to write a headline about? And if you can have some sort of a solution that can help in the Great Resignation because you can change workflow, you're now able to talk about something that's already of news value. Unless you happen to be the first of something ever, and you better be able to substantiate it, the biggest of something, right? Never before tried again, KPIs that are just astonishing, which would be very unusual for somebody in the startup world or a brand new product being introduced to the marketplace. You got to have some other news sort of surrounding what you're trying to say if you are doing editorial placement. And then you're going to have a higher likelihood that you'll get earned media. Now, there's nothing to be embarrassed about in terms of content syndication or placements of articles. The small little sponsored by is sometimes not necessarily noticed as much. Those still have to be, if you want to get respect in the industry about a product that you have, they cannot be product centric. They still have to be solving a problem in the industry. And I would recommend that there's a good blend of that kind of placement that appears to be earned media, may not necessarily be earned media, that can create a buzz. And a buzz is a loose word, but create some awareness around your company and what you do, that your likelihood of starting to get some earned media would be greater and greater. And look, we've had a big struggle because we have a digital cloud fax solution as our foundational solution. Nobody wants to cover digital cloud faxing. It's old stuff. A lot of editors cannot, they're astonished when we talk about the statistics and the data of how much paper and how many users are still standing at a fax machine. And we're lucky because we did a survey. And I would recommend this kind of stuff too. If you can do a survey of the industry that supports your product, you're not, again, coming out of the chute saying, my baby's beautiful. You're saying, wow, look at this survey that said there's a problem and what we can solve that problem. So we did a survey of our administrators because we have quite a few in our customer base. And we asked them, how many of you are still standing at fax machines? Over 60% said they still stand at a fax machine. And that was based on about 3,000 responses. So it's a pretty reliable statistical number. And I've had editors say, that's appalling to me. People are still using a fax machine today. That then all of a sudden is so astonishing to them. That's the kind of headline that they want to write about. How do we get rid of this paper? But if I came at them and said, you should write articles about, this great and wonderful digital cloud faxing solution, they would be, well, who cares? Nobody cares about that.
Right.
So it's challenging, but I'm lucky enough that I do know what news value is, and I can spin it in such a way that says, who are the readers of this publication? Who are the viewers? Who are the listeners of your podcast? And really make sure that you're hitting it on all cylinders, because you will not get coverage if you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great, like knowing the difference between, how far you can go with an editorial piece and what angles you should take, or, could save you a lot of wasted time if you're trying to pitch product focused and there's no real meat to the story. So you have a good grasp of what content can go where. And if there is, hey, a sponsored content, like you said, there's no shame in sponsored content. I mean, I think a lot of publications are kind of upping those sponsored content slots. And I think that's becoming a bigger part of a lot of organizations' marketing budgets and marketing, strategies, because there's a time and place for everything, just depending on the message. And so with those, you're able to educate the market in a very thoughtful way, well planned. I'm fully explaining this scenario and, talking about this problem that, this solution happens to solve, but I'm explaining, this whole article where I can kind of walk through all the reasons why this makes sense versus, editorial, you have less control over it. It's sometimes just hanging on a timely news happening. So I think there's a time and place for each of those.
And I've been in this place too. And I've had, CEOs I've worked for just look at me in an inquisitive way, like, really? So many times when you do get that earned media and you're talking to reporters, the article comes out, they talk about how great and wonderful the solution is that you offer and never mention the product.
Right. Yep.
And, I know that's kind of frustrating. And truly, when I was a general assignment reporter, so I had my story handed to me at like 10 o'clock in the morning, I had to have it filed by 4:30, but I also worked the business desk. And I was very resistant to just getting a press release and then all of a sudden just having it sit in the business section of our newspaper. It was, how am I going to spin this so that the readers that are business people are really getting some value out of this? And I would many times take the product name out of the headline, because it's not about the product name. It's about what is that product actually doing.
Yep.
And I would get calls from some of the PR people inside. So I've worked both sides. I'd get calls from people like me going, really? You took that product name out of the headline? But it's important because it can't look like a commercial for the vendor. And there are ways to weave in your product.
Right. I really love that insight from you, because talking to someone who's been on both sides, is always interesting,
Well, and I think it's hard to explain that to other folks, including CEOs and other people in product, your chief technology officer that, well, no, look at the headline, doesn't even really mention the name of the product, but you've got to get past those editorial gatekeepers to be able to get that kind of exposure. And then the next big question that marketers will be asked all the time is that soft stuff, that media, that PR stuff you're working on, the content syndication, the podcasts that you're doing. How is that getting our sales organizations qualified leads? They're meeting a BANT criteria, a buyer, an authoritative person, a timeline, and a budget, etc. Where's the qualified lead coming from? All that and poo-poo, who needs to spend money on some of that? And it is important that as you even look at the value behind branding, brand promise, thought leadership, doing things like earned media or content syndication, that your website, which is the calling card, is going to be in such a way that it is supporting some of those key themes that you are trying to use as your brand promise to the marketplace. Because if you've got a significant budget that's being put in place for some of the white papers, like you just said, and I mean, Tom, you and I have worked together on some of these programs. It's
Right.
that, what's our call to action here? Where do we want people to go so that they can learn more? When you have somebody read your article, they don't become a prospect. You don't even know who they are. There's tools and MarTech tools that can help you understand better. If you have content syndication that's gated, then you can find out a little bit more about them. But you probably do this too. You'll download a white paper, but you're not ready to buy. And it's just so annoying to get hounded by salespeople, right? So we look at a download of a white paper, for instance, even though it might be gated, we don't really call that a marketing qualified lead. We now know who they are, which is fabulous, because we can start to send them some drip. We can start to send them some more information and hope that and we have a sophisticated scoring system within Salesforce, and we use a product called Pardot, but we hope they get to a stage where now they should get a salesperson to talk to them. But it's important the soft stuff, I'm a passionate believer in. I think you have to have the brand promise and the brand awareness. You can't come out of the chute being too product centric about what you do and what you offer.
Right.
But if you don't connect it to how that's going to help you get sales, ultimately somebody's going to question a budget like that and wonder, really, from a marketing department, what are you bringing in for the company? And it's important to recognize that you'll be on the hot seat for that.
Well, Bevey, this has been a terrific conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we get a front row seat of being able to see the great stuff that Consensus Cloud Solutions is doing and will be doing. So, and we're looking forward to that. And thank you for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. I hope your listeners got some value out of it.
Thanks, Bevey.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us today. We are sponsored by Anderson Interactive and can be heard weekdays at 10 a.m., 6 p.m. and 2 a.m. Eastern on Healthcare Now Radio. And as a reminder, we are always looking for other brilliant marketers to join us for an upcoming Outside Insights episode. Are you a health IT marketer at a corporation or agency that can join us on a future episode? We'd love to hear from you, so you can share your anecdotes of promotional campaigns or describe what marketing tactics you see as overrated or underused. Please reach out to us at hello@andersoni, that's the letter I.com, or tweet us at Jen_Jennings, Tom_Testa, or Adrian_Stoner.
Thanks for listening to the Overrated and Underused show with your hosts, experienced marketers Jen Jennings and Tom Testa, and special guest Adrian Stoner. Overrated and